In this lecture that I'm titling called The Organization of a Crime Laboratory, you're going to use it to do the assignment on the mapping method of note-taking. So let's go ahead and go through it. Crime labs were pretty much developed in the 1960s. And they had you see a pretty good increase in them based upon the fact that you would see more crimes, more drug-related crimes were occurring starting in about the 60s. We needed more need for physical evidence collection processes and analyzing that. And of course, we today see crime labs being involved a lot in DNA profiling. Currently in the United States, if you'll notice at the bottom here, we have about 350 crime laboratories found in the United States. The services of the crime laboratory is many. Many local crime laboratories have been created for the solely purpose of processing evidence. Currently, most of their energy and funds are used to analyze drugs and DNA. Those are the biggies today, DNA being probably number one. In 1932, Hoover first established a national forensics laboratory to support all law enforcement in the United States. Hoover was the director of the FBI at that time. The oldest American forensics laboratory is in Los Angeles, California, and it was created in 1923 by a gentleman by the name of August Vollmer, or August Vollmer, depending on how you want to pronounce it. The crime laboratory units generally are, by standard, have the physical science department, biological departments, firearms departments, documents, and photography departments. They may have optional services such as toxicology, fingerprints, polygraph, voice prints, and just general voice print evidence collection in general. Basic services that are provided by a full-service crime laboratory will be the physical science unit. This applies the principles and techniques of both chemistry, physics, geology to identify and compare a crime scene evidence. The biological unit will identify dried blood stains and body fluids, compare hairs and fibers, identifies and compares botanical materials such as wood and plants, and of course, most importantly, performs DNA analysis. Firearms unit, they will, of course, analyze firearms. They look at the discharged bullets in the ballistic sense, cartridge cases, shotgun shells, ammunitions of all types. Documentation examination unit, this is the one that analyzes handwriting, paper, and printer type documents. So printer type, types of printers, ink being used, etc. The photography unit examines and records the physical evidence at the crime scene and all suspect locations. Toxicology unit will examine bodily fluids and organs in order to determine the presence and identification of drugs and poisons. The fingerprint unit, of course, is going to process and examine evidence for latent fingerprints, such as those found on surfaces, etc. Polygraph unit is going to use lie detectors, which is considered an essential tool for an investigator rather than a forensic science. But it can fall under the forensic category. Voice print analysis unit is involved in cases of telephone threats or tape recorded messages, whereas the evidence, going back to voice print, the investigator may be able to connect a voice to a particular suspect. The evidence collection unit, this is going to incorporate evidence collection into a total forensic science service. So this is basically getting things all put together based upon all of the previous types of evidence that may be collected from firearms, from blood samples, DNA samples for the biological unit, etc. So that's just a brief overview of what a crime investigation laboratory would be composed of. They can be very complex or they can be very simple. It kind of depends upon budgetary resources, whether or not a community or a police department or whatnot can support all of the different units that we just listed. But so it can vary. I know in the state of Idaho, a lot of local departments will ship off forensic evidence to the state because we have a state forensic lab that will analyze it and then send it back to the local jurisdictions versus the locals having all of this because obviously they can't afford it. Your job on this part of the checkpoint for the mapping method of note-taking is to look at the instructions of how you create a map, which would be found in your OneNote over here. So I would read through the mapping method, and then I want you to create a map of the notes on the crime investigation unit that we just went through. So on how you organize a crime laboratory. This one is pretty hard to do on OneNote. It's not impossible, but I think the quicker way to do this is to get out a sheet of white paper, or just any paper, doesn't matter. Blank is usually better. And to create your map on a piece of paper, and then photograph it and insert it below. Just a reminder that when you're photographing, you need to make sure that you are putting your name clearly on the document, because if I don't see a name on it, I won't accept it. I'll actually delete it and say I need to have a photograph of the assignment with your name on it and send it back to you. So you will complete that in the OneNote section that says assignment. The OneNote section that says note-taking mapping method is the instructions or background information of how you create a map if you're not familiar with mapping, and then using that this lecture to generate the map notes. Okay, thank you.